Conservative leader Andrew Scheer is blasting the government over the Mark Norman case, the approach to China, the economy. But the old adage in politics still holds true. You can't just oppose, you've got to propose ideas as well. And Mr. Scheer has just released his foreign policy ideas. One of the most controversial aspects is joining the ballistic missile defense project with the United States. What would that mean? To talk about all that, joining me now is the leader of the official opposition, Conservative Party leader Andrew Scheer. Sir, great to have you back on the program. Let me start with the case against Vice Admiral Mark Norman. The case collapsed. The government have now said they're going to pay all his legal bills and he'll be reinstated to what position we don't know. What do you see went wrong in this case? What questions do you have right now?
Well, what we see here is the same playbook that we saw in the SNC-Lavalin scandal, where someone stood up to the government, someone stood up to Justin Trudeau, and was punished for that. And in this case, Mark Norman had his career destroyed and his reputation attacked simply for doing what he thought was right for the Canadian Navy and for the Canadian taxpayers. The key here is that the evidence that exonerated Mark Norman was evidence that the government possessed. So they've known all along that they haven't had a case, and yet they obstructed the course of this investigation by sitting on that information, preventing it from getting to court, by coaching witnesses, and by using code names within the department to avoid access to information requests. So this is very concerning for Canadians when they see a government abusing the justice system in this way to punish enemies and reward friends.
The prosecution and the defense, though, they did agree that there was no government interference in the case, especially in the decision to drop the case. So you keep asking about government interference. So where's the government interference if they say the Office of the Public Prosecutor acted independently?
Well, that's the key here, and you're right that in the decision to stay the charges, both the defense and the prosecution says that that decision was taken independently. But we have to remember that the other party in this is the government itself, and that's where there were attempts to impede the investigation. So, like I said, sitting on documents, opposing the release of that information to court, not allowing Mark Norman access to his own documents, his own emails, using code names within a department, Evan. Can you imagine government officials trying to avoid access to information laws that are meant to ensure the truth comes out, using code names to avoid those very laws? So the excuse the Liberals are using is that because the prosecutor acted independently, that the system works. But what they're actually saying is that they were prevented from interfering, and so the system works. Well, I don't take much comfort in knowing that the government was trying to obstruct the course of this investigation. Thank goodness the Director of Public Prosecution acted independently, but that's not because of the government, it's despite of their actions.
Last question on this. Who's accountable then, Mr. Scheer? Is it the Chief of the Defense Staff, General Vance, who first said, Mark Norman, you've got to go, I'm suspending you? Is it the Defense Minister who was just on the program? Is it the Prime Minister? Who's accountable and what should happen to them?
Well, I think the buck stops with Justin Trudeau. This isn't something that happened years ago that's only come to light. This entire process happened under his watch. He was the one that came out and said that Mark Norman would ultimately be charged and face a court proceeding before the RCMP even brought charges. He was the one that knew that his own officials were refusing to provide this evidence to court throughout this process. Remember, the public prosecutor said that it was information evidence provided to the court by the government that ultimately led to the decision to stay these charges. So they've known for 2 years that they didn't have a case. Why did they wait so long? And what it tells me is that the truth contained in that evidence is more damaging to the Liberal government than the political price of the cover-up and of the delay tactic. That is something that Canadians should be very alarmed about.
Should the Chief of the Defense Staff, General Vance, who was given advice on this, should he be forced to resign? Should he be fired?
Well, you know, we would like to have these individuals before parliamentary committees to find out what went so wrong here. We've had a highly respected and decorated Vice Admiral go through the ringer for the sole crime of speaking the truth and trying to do what is right for the Canadian Navy. So far, we haven't been able to get any of those answers in question period, so we're going to be using parliamentary tools available to us to find out what went so horribly wrong here, and ultimately, we will be making calls for who should be held responsible once we have all that information.
Okay, so calls for that. Let me talk about your foreign policy ideas that you revealed this past week. Stephen Harper, Paul Martin, Justin Trudeau, they all refused to join the United States Ballistic Missile Defense Project. Why do you think Canada should join? Why are you wanting to closely align yourself with Donald Trump's foreign policy?
Well, look, I reject that the goal here is to have closer alignment with the current president of the United States. What I'm talking about is finding ways to strengthen our relationships with our key allies and key partners, allies and partners that have the same fundamental commitment to democracy, to human rights, and to individual liberty. The relationship between Canada and the United States goes far beyond the personalities of either our Prime Minister or their President of the day. But when we're looking at the emergence of China in Asia, when we're looking at Russia's continued aggression in its sphere of influence, we need to ask ourselves how we can participate, how we can strengthen our relationships, because we are going to need stronger friendships and stronger alliances.
Would you agree to missile testing, ballistic missile testing on Canadian soil? And as has been floated in the past, what if those missiles had nuclear warheads? Would you consider having those on Canadian soil?
So what I announced in my speech was the willingness to enter into talks. So those are things that all need to be proposed and looked at down the road. But what I'm saying in this overall framework of my foreign policy approach is that we need to start looking at these things to strengthen our relationships and so show that we're willing to carry our share of the burden when it comes to dealing with countries that act against our best interests, that act against democratic principles.
Well, sir, I got to ask you about your promise to reveal your policy on the environment. You say it's just weeks or months away. Remember back in June of 2017, you and your entire party, except for one member, voted to support Canada's commitment to the Paris Climate Accord and the same targets of greenhouse gas emission reductions that the Liberals and the Stephen Harper government supported. You supported all that. Will you promise, I won't ask you the details of the plan, but will your plan meet the targets that you voted for? Can we trust that you will hit those targets that you've told me before you will hit?
Yeah. And again, Evan, I will tell you that the current Liberal government has no plan to hit those targets, that it's been shown that their carbon tax will not hit their own targets. I can tell you that our plan will give Canada the best possible shot. It will work towards reducing our greenhouse gas emissions in a way that we have committed to in the past, recognizing our international obligations to do our part here in Canada.
Okay, but I don't want you to dodge it. The Liberal, they have a plan to meet it. You're right, they're not on track to meet it. But I just want to ask you, because it's a question of trust. Are you going to break the promise you made to have a plan that will hit the targets? That's all I want to know. As a trust issue, will your plan hit? Will it hit the targets? Yes or no?
And as I said, our plan will give Canada the best possible chance of doing that. Our plan will be workable. It'll be realistic. It'll be a real plan to achieve those reduction targets.
Okay, I just want to know. So you're saying you're still committed to hitting the targets that you voted for and your plan. It's important because it's a very big promise issue.
I understand, Evan, and I understand there's been a lot of expectation for this environmental plan, and it is coming in just a few weeks, and it'll all be explained in there in a very comprehensive way. I suspect this will be the most comprehensive policy announcement by an opposition party in Canadian history. Remember, the Liberal environmental plan going into the last election was basically a paragraph and a half. This will be a very well thought out, well articulated plan to help to get to those reduction targets.
All right, I got to leave it there. We look forward to seeing that. Mr. Scheer, always good to have you on the program.